And we are live, and I'm here once again with TJ to discuss famous battles. No. Actually, that's incorrect, right? Because it's not necessarily the battles are famous. So this one is, because actually there was a movie about it. But these are battles that affected history. Like if they had gone the other way, things would be very, very different. This one, right. A lot of people don't know it by name. Do you want to try to pronounce it, TJ, or should I?
Hattin.
Battle of Hattin. I think I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah.
So anyway, I am going to put this out on Twitter because I am Boomer Tech, and I got to log into my what do you call it? Log into what the hell am I saying here? Oh shoot! Is it asking me for my? I have several different Gmail accounts. So, of course, let's see here. Okay, TJ, why don't you set up the battle while I do my boomer tech here?
Okay, so the Battle of Hattin took place between the Second and Third Crusade, and I guess while he's working on the boomer tech stuff, let's talk a little bit about background. So back in the late, not 1100s, but the 11th century, so 1090s, the Pope Urban II had called for a crusade for the first pope to do so, called for a crusade to go liberate the Holy Lands from the Turks, the Ottomans, the Muslims, essentially, that were in control of Jerusalem. Prior to the birth of Islam, the Holy Land had been controlled by the Byzantine Empire, so the Eastern Roman Empire. And over centuries, the Ottomans and Turks later took possession of those lands, and then they took possession of Asia Minor in 1070s. So eventually the Byzantine emperor sent a letter to Pope Urban II requesting troops. At that time, the Catholic Church had split just recently with the Eastern Orthodox Church. So prior to that, they'd been a single church. There had been some sort of the Great Schism. I can't remember. I'm not terribly knowledgeable about the exact circumstances, but the separation of those two churches had been relatively recent. So Pope Urban II saw it as an opportunity to reclaim the Holy Lands, get Christians in Europe to stop fighting each other, but also help reunite the Roman Catholic Church with the Eastern Orthodox Church. So he calls for a crusade. The important part from a religious perspective is that he said anyone who went and fought on this crusade would immediately enter heaven. Catholics are different from other Christian denominations and sects in that they believe in a place called purgatory. This is where when you die and you're saved, you do not directly go to heaven. You spend a certain amount of time in purgatory where you are purged, as the word would imply. You're purged of your sin, your uncleanliness, and then you're allowed to enter heaven.
Yeah, by the way, I'm going to be having to spend a long time there. But anyway.
And so people did all these different things to lessen their time. This is why back during the medieval times, a lot of wealthy people gave away a lot of their material possessions, but when they died, they founded hospitals. As they got older, they just ended up just giving away most of their wealth. The idea is that it would lessen your time in purgatory. When the Pope did that, for a lot of people, that was of huge religious significance, but it was also big for men who are not the firstborn child, because that meant that you were not going to inherit any land or property for the most part. So you would go on a crusade. You would either earn a military distinction. You could also, there was opportunity to gain your own land by conquest. So the first crusade ended up actually, despite all the odds against them, if you haven't read about the Siege of Antioch, it's one of the most amazing things I've ever read. They ended up taking Jerusalem. So 100 years later, you have the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and you have Saladin, who's down in, I believe, Egypt. He's the Sultan down there. He's united a lot of these warring factions within the Muslim world, and he's attacking, trying to reclaim the Holy Lands for the Muslims. So around that time of the Battle of Hattin, Hattin, the Crusaders had a very large army that was protecting Jerusalem. And they had a very important decision at that point. Their previous king, Baldwin the Fourth of Jerusalem, who was also another fascinating figure that people should read about. He had just died. There was a new king on the throne, and they decided to attack. And this really shows a difference in mindset between. This really shows the European Christian at that time attitude was you would put all caution to the wind and you would attack. And that was where a lot of the Crusade armies drew their strength, was particularly within the cavalry charges. Despite the impressions people have today, the Crusaders were actually despite all the odds, they were fighting in foreign lands. They were fighting in a climate that they were not accustomed to. Their clothes were not accustomed for it. Their bodies were not used to dealing with it. And of course, the train has to come by at this moment. It's okay. They inflicted very significant defeats on the Muslims, particularly Saladin. There was a famous battle that the Leper King led.
Yeah, so this is interesting. We're going to get back to him. He plays a key role into this, but keep going.
Yeah, Monte Gizzard, I think is the way you pronounce it, near Gizur, and it was a completely devastating defeat for Saladin, where he lost most of his army in this battle. His army was completely crushed. So that was prior to this. So it's not like the Crusaders had been losing and this was the final thing. They had a very strong upper hand at that point.
Well, they had taken Jerusalem. They had the city.
Yeah, they had the city. Yeah, they had the city for 100 years up to this point, and
they were cultivating the land. They were farming it.
It's really fascinating to see how the European nobility had transplanted itself down there, where you had a significant European presence down in the Holy Lands during this time period. And what happened is when the king died, Baldwin IV, there was King Guy. I'm trying to remember what his name was. I'm going to pull that up. Guy of anyways, the king ends up deciding to march his army away from the city and to march it through a desert where there's no water. And that's, I mean, you pretty much know how this battle is going to go after that point. I'm trying to pull up a map right now on a book that I have because it gives a really good picture of what that looked like. So yeah, they were trying to march through this very so it's in Galilee, which is where Christ did a lot of his ministry, and it's north of Jerusalem. But here's the thing that's very important to remember. The Crusaders could have stayed in the city. They did not have to attack. There was nothing to be gained. They were being drawn out by Saladin, who had already tried to attack them on numerous occasions and didn't succeed. Well, what Saladin did is he allowed the Crusaders to essentially march to an area where there was no water, and then he just harassed them for most of the battle. I mean, it wasn't really a battle. If you think about it.
Yeah, because at the time where they were actually crossing swords, at that point, the Crusader army. Now there was a bit of a schism within the Christians, if we want to call them that, right? There was the Knights Templar who had an army. There was
right.
Who was all gung ho, let's go to defeat him, kind of.
Yeah.
Nutcase. And then there was people who like had a brain and they were like, no, this is probably not a good idea. I think it was during July. Okay. Now, July in the Middle East, look, it's hot in Seattle in July. Okay. So I don't know if it's been recorded, but it's dry and it's hot and there's no damn water. okay, where they were. So, but he insisted because their cause was righteous that, they can win the battle or something. I believe that was his logic. And you know more about the internal politics that was going on now about this. Like how was that working?
Well, I mean, you had all these different factions. You had, obviously, you had the Knights Templar. You also had the Knights Hospitaller, if I can pronounce it.
Yes.
You also had the Order of St. Lazarus, the Order of Mountjoy. You had the Principality of Antioch, the County of Tripoli. Then you had the Kingdom of Jerusalem. So you had all these different Christian factions representing different interests. The Knights Templar were a combination of warrior monks and bankers. I mean, the Templars set up the first modern banking system in the world. It was where you could deposit money in some part of Europe, go to the other side of Europe, and withdraw money from the same account.
That's where all these conspiracy theories come about the Knights Templar, because where they get their money from. Well, that's where they got it.
Well, yeah, and you had all these different groups, but what happened at the time of the battle, the Saracens were attacking the fortress of Tiberias, which was held by Count Renaud's wife. He was one of the nobility of the Holy Land for the Europeans. And the thing is, though, it was in a well-defended fortress. They didn't have to immediately relieve them. So the other thing is, if you took your time, when an army is besieging a fortress, that's hard enough as it is. When there's a relief force, that makes it so you have to break off for the most part. I was reading a book recently about medieval castle sieges, and most castles were actually after a certain period of time, if they could hold out for, like, say 2 weeks, they were impregnable, because by that time a relief force could come and drive off the besiegers who were not prepared to fight that kind of a battle. Obviously, the siege of Antioch was a contradiction of that, which is another reason why people should read about that battle. But the thing is, Count Raymond was saying, let's take our time, let's go attack in a proper manner. Well, the king guy who was on the throne of Jerusalem wanted to attack the Saracens now. And the most
wasn't there like a semi vote held, like where the heads of the different orders?
Yeah, there was Renaud of Châtillon and Gerard de Riedefort, who just said, you basically just need to attack. Like, don't worry about anything else. Just go on the offensive.
Yeah.
And I think it was really like that retarded. Like, they actually just to, you don't even have to be an armchair general, but like, these guys had seen combat. Right. And what's also funny is the Templars had been in a previous engagement where they had 140 knights and the Grand Masters were with them, and they attacked Saracens at Kishon. So 140 men. They were attacking a force of 6,500 men.
Mm.
So 140 guys attacked 6,500. Only 3 of them survived.
3 Templars survived.
Three Templars, including the Grand Master.
Well, didn't Templars had this weird rule, like when they engaged in battle, they weren't allowed to retreat unless outnumbered by, I forget what the.
Oh yeah, they also couldn't leave a brother behind. Like, kind of the old that code of no man left behind. They would never leave a brother knight or fellow Templar behind.
So this cost them, like, if they lost, they were going to lose big, because that's just the nature of how they were not like, let's cut our losses kind of a thing. They were like, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. And the thing is, when they won, I mean, they were very good warriors. They were very well trained. The problem is there just weren't a whole lot of them. Most Templars were actually not warriors. They were mostly administrative or in banking. There were very few actual warrior monks in the order. So to lose 140 of them, to kind of give a comparison, at the Battle of Montgizard, there was only 80 Templars out of a force of around, I'd say, 4,500 men.
Okay.
So there wasn't a whole lot of them, but they were they had a prominent role because of their status as soldiers. They were
well, and by this point, by the time of this battle, the Battle of Hattin, they had also accumulated a massive amount of wealth.
Yeah, I actually went to the Knights Templar headquarters in England, and they, one of their common, their basically their symbol is two knights on a horse, because they were the order was founded by three men, and they were so poor that two of them had to ride one horse because they only had two horses. So that kind of symbolized their poverty at the time. But they ended up, they got some sort of blessing from the Pope, like an official charity of the Catholic Church, and they ended up becoming one of the wealthiest charities. I mean, people don't think about it this way, but they were considered a charity. You donated money to them, and to get a blessing from the Pope on that meant that it would probably count as some sort of, credit to your soul in purgatory or something like that.
Right. Well, also the Knights Templar, that order was founded after the First Crusade, after Jerusalem had been taken by the Christians. And from what I understand, there's a lot of speculation about this. Is the reason given for the founding of the order was to protect Christian pilgrims traveling from Europe to Jerusalem, correct?
Yeah, that was I guess the official founding. We don't know obviously what inspired that, but that was actually what kind of kicked off the Crusades. Was when, prior to the Turks taking over Jerusalem, the Muslims who held Jerusalem had been pretty tolerant. They allowed pilgrimages. They didn't really make too much of a thing about it.
Well, you had to pay the tax, though. They did that to the Christians and the Jews, where you had to pay that. Yeah. They still have that.
Yeah, they still have that. I think if you lived there, I don't know about pilgrimages. I just know that the Muslims, the Ottomans or whoever it was that held Jerusalem prior to the Turks, had been more lenient. So people probably they just paid a little bit of money and that was it. But when the Turks came and took Jerusalem, they were persecuting Christians there. They were not allowing them to visit, or they were basically extorting them to get money. So these reports were coming back into Europe. And then that was the context in which the Byzantine emperor was asking for some reinforcements, for some troops, for some backup to help reclaim Asia Minor. And the Pope kind of put two and two together. It's like, we can go, why go for Asia Minor when we can take it all? We can go for the Holy Lands.
Go big or go home.
Exactly.
Come on. Yeah.
I actually just got in the mail a book that has primary source material from the First Crusade. So one of them is ostensibly Pope Urban the Second speech when he was calling for a crusade and all that kind of stuff. And I'm curious to see what he says in it, as far as who knows what he actually said.
But his official decree.
He gave speeches. I don't know how much he did an actual. I'll have to look that up. That's the one thing about the Catholic churches. They'll have the papal decrees or a papal bull or something like that. And I'll have to see what he had to say on this issue. I just know it. What we do know is it produced one of the most remarkable military migrations in European history, because thousands and thousands of these European nobles and common men and armies were descended upon Constantinople and then went into the Holy Land. And having never encountered these people before in their life, they'd never done any kind of combat in the Middle East. They had never fought the Turks. So it's just a fascinating way that for the fact that they succeeded. I mean, I don't know how much people have read about the siege of Antioch, but it almost borders on a supernatural. I mean, this is why.
Well, no, that's what was his name? The guy that actually one that storms into Jerusalem, and the first, when they actually first took Jerusalem, that's where Deus Vult comes from. That's where the expression Deus Vult comes from, was from when he took. It was God's will, because it was like, it was it did seem like divine intervention.
Right. Well, so I was going to say, there's a reason why the Crusades have always been held this kind of fascination within, I would say, to separate Christian doctrine from Christian mythology, where people claim things happened, or, like the Holy Grail during the Crusades and all this other, a lot of very mystical, like with King Arthur and all that kind of stuff was big during that time. Well, yeah, because what happened is the Crusaders attacked Jerusalem. They failed. Then they decided that they need to do a religious ceremony. So they marched around Jerusalem 7 times, which is what the Israelites did at the Battle of Jericho. The next day, they attacked and immediately entered the city with very light resistance. So they saw that as a divine sign that
God's will.
And then, kill them all and let God sort it out, right? That was kind of like their.
Well, you don't have to answer this question if it's too personal, but are you a Catholic?
I'm not. I'm actually.
Okay.
I'm on the. I'm probably more on the other side of the.
Oh no, you don't. You don't. You can say if you want, but that's religion's a personal thing with some people, so I don't want to. It's only the only reason I ask is it's relevant to this this battle that we're talking about, but you don't have to say whether you are or you're not. So
I'm not Catholic. I just know a lot about it because I've read. One, it was such a big part of European history, and I love. And also, this period of history is really fascinating because of the stuff that actually happened. Like at the Siege of Antioch, the Crusaders are attacking this. They're besieging Antioch in the First Crusade. They are running out of supplies. They're running out of food. They get attacked by a relief force. They fend them off. They then go take the city. All the remaining defenders flee into the citadel. Then another relief force comes and besieges the Crusaders, who are now inside of a city that they've been besieging.
Right. It was
then the Crusaders essentially run out of food, supplies. They're drinking horse's blood. They're resorting to very desperate stuff. Well, they decide that they're just going to go all out and attack. They spend a whole day praying. Then they come out of the gates of the city and attack the relief force and drive them away. I mean, and then
I think the reason that tactic worked is because it was the last thing that the
exactly
the Muslims expected. Well, no, because I mean, it's kind of like the battles that I know about, like was like the Hitler's final push towards Moscow in 41. Where they were about to go on the offensive, and all of a sudden they get overrun by the Eastern forces that had come from Siberia, and they just get wiped out. So, I mean, the last, if you're not prepared for defense when an attack comes, and it's the last thing you're expecting.
Right. And and I think that's what's so remarkable is they were able to do the right like militarily. They did stuff that I was reading a book on this. Like people don't really understand it today, but their religious fervor, whether people agree with the theology exactly or not. And this is where people get kind of annoying where they talk about what they actually believe. And I said, yeah, but look what they accomplished with that belief. It was an idea that they were able to go into a foreign land, defeat armies when they were outnumbered, they were starving, whatever. So they managed.
They weren't supplied. They were fighting on. They were, like what's the expression in football? You're fighting on the other person's. You don't have, they don't have home field advantage.
Well, not only that, but the Crusaders are fighting amongst themselves.Ey're fighting with the Constantinople because the Byzantine emperor ended up actually a couple times making secret deals with the Muslims, where the Muslims.
I did not know.
Yeah, that. There was one city where the Muslims surrendered to the Byzantine emperor, so he actually got possession of the city. This is why, in a lot of cases, it caused a lot of tension with the. That was another thing that kind of, from a Catholic, I know Catholic perspectives on this is that the Eastern European. Not Eastern European, the Eastern Orthodox Church and that side of Christendom was on the sidelines during this whole thing. Like they see this as a purely Catholic. Incidentally, when Saladin actually took Jerusalem back after the Battle of Hattin, Guess who sent him a congratulatory note?
What, the Emperor of Constantinople?
The Byzantine Emperor.
Yeah, all right.
Because because he was hoping that they would allow Eastern Orthodox religious services in these churches, because the Holy Lands was, like I was just saying, was controlled by Catholics. Roman Catholics made up most of this force. And then, of course, these tensions.
Yeah, I mean, majority of them were French and Italian, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of French, definitely a lot of French, and that's the context for what happened up into the battle.
But actually, back in, we're talking around, ballpark 1100 AD. I don't know if France was a defined nation state.
No,
yet.
It wasn't. I just read a book on a Norman knight, William Marshall, the champion of the Magna Carta. At that time, the Normans had conquered England. So the Normans controlled Normandy, they controlled England. But they were not.
Hence the name, by the way, the Normans.
Right.
But anyway.
Right. And they were actually Scandinavian in nature. They were from the north, so Norway. That's why they were called. Normandy comes from Northmen. And
a lot of them were Danes as well, but yeah.
Yeah. They were essentially from that part of Europe. They did not see themselves as French. They saw themselves as Normans. Well, what happened is King John, the one for the Robin Hood bad king, he ended up losing all of that part of the Aquitaine Empire in France, in what today is France. So all of Normandy got lost, everything. And a lot of barons, a lot of nobles had to choose between which king were they going to serve, because you got to swear fealty to the king of who ultimately controls the land that you're on.
Right.
And a lot of them ended up siding with King John just for various reasons. And so that was really when the English identity began to form, where the Normans started integrating into with the Anglo-Saxon. At that time in England, there was the nobility and the aristocracy was all Norman, but the vast majority of people were still Anglo-Saxon. I mean, if you break down the genetics of modern day people in England, they're not Norman. But that's where, so you were right in saying they didn't consider France was not a unified country. There was the Franks of the Charlemagne Empire, the Carolinginian Empire, but the French were not all of France, and I would even argue like Brittany is still Celtic. That it's one of the holdouts from.
You could argue that Scotland and Ireland is. I don't know how much Lower England you could call as Celtic, but anyway.
There's Cornwall and the Welsh are also Celtic, but I mean, I don't know.
That guy Sykes, the guy that was he cracked back in the 90s. He was the guy that mapped DNA.
Oh yeah.
He did the thing where they showed the genetic similarities between the Irish and the Scottish, which wasn't a big surprise, but the Britons, not so much. They got Romans and they're pretty mudded up, as you'd say. But right. I don't mean that as a slight. I'm just saying there was
it's funny how England has so many different identities. You had the Romans there was the original Britons, and then there was the Angles, the Anglians.
The Angles, the Saxons.
And then you had the Normans come in. And so this very interesting identity. But prior to that, no, the Normans, there was part of modern day France that was Norman, controlled by the Norman Empire. And then there was the French who were, down south.
Right. Yeah. And actually the Frankish tribes originally were Germanic. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah, I think we were discussing a little bit of that when we were talking about the Battle of, what was the name of that? Alesia, the Siege of Alesia.
Ah, yes. Oh, no, we were talking about how the Romans used the German. Well, that's back when the French were Celts before the Romans killed them all. And pretty much, I mean, not all, but I mean, they did a hell of a job, because there's not a lot of genetic footprint of the Celts left in France anymore. And you will, I mean, it's kind of like what you're saying, last holdout of Celts, of true Celtic blood, what you'd find in, I guess, Ireland and Scotland. The rest got kind of absorbed by anyway, but yeah.
So that's what's really interesting about what was going on prior to this battle in the Middle East, is that despite all these problems, the Crusaders had a very effective fighting army that, if used in a defensive nature within Jerusalem, could be very potent. You would essentially be able to withstand a siege, and there was no need to do any kind of attack at that point. The other context.
Right, so let me set this up. Let's go back to the actual Battle of Hattin, because that's the title of this. But it is impossible to talk about that battle without the preamble of explaining everything else that was going on and the previous battles that added up to this. So before the Battle of Hattin, the Crusaders had taken Jerusalem, and they had held it for approximately 100 years. Trade was going back and forth through Europe, more or less unobstructed. Correct?
Yeah.
They had fortified the city. They were living there. Life was peaceful. Like that, from what I understand, Christians, Muslims, and Jews were all kind of living with each other, and for the most part, getting along.
That's. I honestly don't know. I would assume that there was probably, at some point, you have to have some level of the. What's interesting is they didn't tear down the Dome of the Rock when they took the city. I don't think. I mean, it's still. I know that when the Muslims took Christian areas, they would convert the churches into a mosque, but I don't know of, because that's what they. I mean, this is a separate battle that's right after this one, but that's essentially what Balin of Ibelin threatened to do when Saladin was going to take Jerusalem. He says, "I'm going to tear down every single holy site and kill everybody." I mean, he really did say that. And so that's when Saladin freaked out and said, that he was going to allow them to leave. He would allow them to surrender the city peacefully, and everyone wouldn't get massacred inside. But so I would assume that they basically understood this is a city that has value to different peoples, and we've got to find some level of peace, I would assume.
Yes, there has to be something, like we can't live in this unless one side was going to kill everybody right down to the last woman and child. There was no way to do that. So you had Jews, Christians, and Muslims all living in the city and in the greater area, and they had to somewhat coexist. Now, of course, depending on who was in charge at the time, you'd have to curb your ways. I know that the Islamists had some sort of weird tax, but as far as I know, Islamists do not, unlike Christians, they do not believe in forced conversions. That's a big no-no in their religion.
That's interesting. I didn't.
They don't. Yeah, they don't believe in forced conversions. Like, they believe in fucking with you, but they don't.
They understand the power of taxing people to death.
Yeah, they will tax you, make life horrible for you, but they don't Charlemagne was literally, when Charlemagne literally had the forced conversions, do you believe in Jesus? And you said, no, you literally got the axe to your head. The Muslims didn't do that. They would, no. if you wanted to become a Muslim, they'd say, okay, you can, but we're not, it can't be done under threat of death. Where Christians, at least Charlemagne, who was the first emperor recognized by a pope, as far as I understand it, was really big on that.
Crowned. He was the first one crowned by of the Holy Roman Empire, and he. I would need to do more research on some of the stuff. I know that there was the famous massacres of the Saxons by Charlemagne. I just don't know how. I think that at some points during this period in history, and probably prior, the tactic for a lot of Christian missionaries was to go to the king or the head guy and convert him, and then he would basically tell everyone else, we're going to be worshiping this god from this point on. and they were
Well,
really
or not even that. Like, yes, that maybe some of them did that, but like if you look at Emperor Constantine, he declared, from what I understand, like I think there's reports of him having a deathbed conversion, but
yeah.
he himself was not a Christian, but he made Christianity the formal religion. Like he didn't force everybody to convert. He just said, "This is as
He
far as
just
I
made it
understand."
politically. I mean, it's really fast. I always found that period fascinating in the sense that he did pass that one. There was the Edict of Milan, but then there was another one that made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. And to think that being a Christian at that point was a way to it's kind of like being
It's like being a liberal in Seattle. Like
yeah, it's like being an anti-racist today.
yes,
It's
yes.
like
It's like BLM in a large
yeah.
city. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a way to, and that's where you got a lot of. And
oh, by the way, YouTube, don't shut down my channel because of that. I just, anyway.
I think that that was when you really started to see people view the religion as opposed to a way of getting, executed by Diocletian,
A way of currying favor.
It was a way of, yes, if you wanted to advance in the ranks, you just regurgitated these basic points, or you actually went and became a bishop, because the bishops ended up holding political power eventually during Augustine's when he was around. So yeah, it's such a different time period to be thinking about how the church not only held power, but reiterating or regurgitating basic Christian doctrine would get you high social status, whereas not exactly what you would get in today's society in most places. So I always found that very, very interesting in the sense that things haven't changed necessarily the way people behave, but we've swapped out what people say. Because back during the Crusades time, obviously you wouldn't go around. If you were in Europe, you were considered part of the church, whether you attended church or not, or whatever, and mostly because you were probably baptized when you were an infant. But it wasn't like you got to decide that, unless you were Jewish or a Muslim, which there were very few Muslims in Europe, and Jews were mostly confined to they were just they were in their own separate communities. They weren't really part of Christian communities, and so it's just different. It's an important context for people to understand, in the way that also served to unite a lot of these different factions. Whereas today, a lot of Christian denominations and sects don't work together because there's not this perceived sense of belonging within a single church. That just doesn't really exist anymore. They also don't believe they're going to go straight to heaven if they fight for something. So,
right, and also a lot of we will get back to that, but I want to well, because we could go off on a real left turn on that one. But no, don't get me wrong. I mean, I love left turns, but so the Battle of Hattin. So let's set this up now. What was the name of the guy that ruled Jerusalem? The leper. Was he a king? What was his?
Yeah, he was. So Baldwin the Fourth was. He was the king of Jerusalem, the kingdom of Jerusalem, and he had been diagnosed with leprosy at a very young age. So everybody understood, like he understood at a young age that he was going to die young, because leprosy was like getting a terminal cancer, and yet he managed to govern very well.
Yeah, he was well respected, this guy. Anyway, keep going.
And I mean, he led at 16 years old. He led an outnumbered Crusader army against Saladin and completely wiped out his army. I mean, this is a 16-year-old boy who was, from some accounts that I've read, he was so ill that he had to be carried on his bed. Like they carried his bed as he watched the battle. I mean,
wow.
What were we all doing at 16 years old?
I'm not allowed to say that on YouTube.
Not allowed to say that on YouTube. Gotcha. But
I certainly wasn't leading troops in the battle and defeating greatly armies that greatly outnumbered my forces. But yeah,
well, also he was. There's this impression that Saladin was this great Saladin was this great military commander who just completely ran circles around the Christian Crusaders. On some occasions, yes. Other occasions, he got whooped. He got whooped by Baldwin IV, and then Richard the Lionheart came in. And from what I've read, I could be wrong, but I recall reading Richard the Lionheart did not lose a single battle in the Third Crusade. He won every battle that he fought. The problem was he couldn't solidify his hold because Barbarossa had drowned. So he wasn't able to maintain the unity.
Well, he couldn't keep anything he won. He won all the major battles that he was engaged in, but he could never hold back home.
He had to get back home because he knew that his brother John was plotting behind his back. So he had that going on. But so this idea that Saladin was this.
Well, no, Saladin, from what I understand, Saladin's genius was uniting the tribes, because that part of the world is, and still is, notoriously tribal, where these people just don't. And that was what he was. So he must have had some, I don't know if military skill per se, but great political skill in uniting the tribes to fight.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. He was probably he was a smart guy. He knew when not to. He knew when not to stop his enemies from making a mistake, which was at the Battle of Hattin, where he just was like, "Okay, we're going to just let him march into the desert, and we're not going to." There were certain periods, like even when the battle was clearly over. Because so I'll give a little bit of a description about what happened.
Well, no, let's before you do that, let's set this up now. Okay, so let's get it from the time of like the reason for the battle, the reason for them leaving Jerusalem. Not all of them left, by the way. Not all of them left. So let's get this. Who stayed? Who left? There was a semi vote, I think. From the different orders, all had each order had like a leader, right? I know the Templars had a very formal leader. I don't know if he was voted in or he was. I think they were voted in. Weren't the Templar leaders? Wasn't a vote taken by senior Templars and they decided who's the leader? Or I don't know how that worked. And there was the different orders of knights. So there was another Christian outpost that was under siege. Now take it from there, brother. Go for it.
So there was a council that was held, and Raymond argued that they should not try to attack. That marching from where their army was stationed to Tiberias, where the siege was going on, he said that that was going to expose the army in a way that it was not exposed by remaining where it was. And he was being accused of cowardice by Renaud de Chatillon and others. And so the guy essentially just said, we're going to attack. I mean, that's kind of what really happened is as I was saying before, it's hard because a lot of people have watched the movie Kingdom of Heaven, and so that's their impression.
Oh, that's the film. That's the film, by the way. It's not totally historically accurate, but they have all the characters, or actually all the historical figures we're talking about are in that film. Now, how accurately they're portrayed, that's a different story. But please continue.
Yeah, so they ended up, which is funny. Raymond, Count Raymond of Tripoli he advised against the march. He advised against the attack. He was one of the few Crusader commanders who was not killed or captured in the attack. So he was leading the rear of the army during the battle. So he was a
rear guard. Okay.
He probably knew what was going on. He's like,
we can see the writing on the wall here, Chief.
Right.
God, I'd love to know what the temperature was. July in the Middle East, man. What the fuck was
There's a photo actually in this book. I can't show it, but it shows what this place looks like. And you wouldn't march a modern army out into that area with water and all those kind of supplies.
Imagine with the chainmail and everything on you and all.
I'm trying to. Well, here's an example of where I talk about the religious fervor playing into it. They had what they believed to be a piece of the cross Christ was crucified on, so the true cross. And they believed that as long as they had that in their possession, they couldn't be defeated in battle. So it's kind of like having the Ark of the Covenant, right? That was kind of their impression. So that's really what in some ways, I think it was just arrogance on their part as well. They were just arrogant, and they were.
Well, in fairness, they had held the city for 100 years.
Well, the Crusaders had. I'm just questioning the battle tactics of guys like Renaud de Chatillon, who they just didn't really seem to have long term. How can I put it? They didn't think long term. They didn't think. They weren't willing to wait out battles. I think that was probably Saladin's strength is he was willing to be patient, and that was where it played out, because he still, even though he won the battle, he could have lost a significant number of men had he played it out differently.
Well, if he engaged them earlier, yeah, because from what I understand, well, you can talk about the harassing attack. All right, so keep going. All right, so I didn't want to interrupt you because you this is your baby. You know more about this battle than I do. Keep going.
Well, so they were marching into this area where there's no water, and
it was July.
And it was July, and it was probably hotter than the gates of hell, and which is probably where a lot of them thought they were marching.
Yeah, right. Considering their religious fervor, they were like, "No, we're already in hell." Yeah, okay.
Right. Well, so this is the difference between Crusader. This is where Crusader tactics were really going to end up being a disaster for them. The Turk or the Muslim, if you like, tactic was they had light cavalry, light infantry. You would do skirmishing. You would do these quick hit and runs. You would shoot arrows or whatever, and then you would retreat back to away from the enemy. The Crusader European style was to get a whole bunch of heavily armored knights together and do a mass charge. And if the charge actually happened to make contact, it was devastating. These horses were huge. The knights were fully clad in armor. They were essentially impregnable, invincible for the most part. Only crossbows could pierce their armor. And so if they made contact with a enemy force, they would just run them over. They'd get mowed for the most part. Right. So it was important for the Muslims who are attacking them to avoid giving them any kind of
no pitch battles, like just constantly harass the shit out of them.
Yeah. So there's nothing that really happened. There wasn't any kind of actual battle, proper battle in this sense. It was the Muslims harassing the Crusaders with arrows and with other, aerial objects. They really didn't actually fight too much. There wasn't a lot of fighting. It was the Crusaders dying of thirst, trying to do these massed cavalry charges, and the Muslim forces would just dissipate. It was like water turning into mist or something like that. So they would avoid giving them a target. Well, eventually, most of the Crusaders got holed up in this one area where they ended up pitching their tent, making their last stand. And it was just Saladin could have sent troops up there to attack and just end the battle, but he would have lost a lot of men because the Crusaders could have still held up. Defensively, they could have held very well. Right. So he just decided to just wait it out and just throw arrows at him all day long. I mean, that's really what they ended up doing. I mean, that was the battle. As that photo I sent over from Twitter, that's pretty much what it looked like.
Share that screen. So he didn't. So the pitch battle thing never happened per se. They just, let me see if I can share this puppy. Okay, I see share screen. It's not sharing my screen. Anyway, I'm sorry, guys. I'm boomer tech here, but you still with me, TJ? Because it warns me I can lose you when I share a screen. But
okay, I'm still here.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So unfortunately, I can't share that screen because Boomer Tech. But hold on, we got. Let's see. Cowardly Dog. In a future video, will you be covering the immense battle that Aaron Cleary has every day when it comes? Oh Jesus, never mind. Okay. No, this is an Aaron Cleary free podcast. Yeah. So it was. So basically, there was never really a. So it's almost like we call it the Battle of Hattin, but it's almost like a misnomer because it really wasn't a battle per se. But can you talk about now? I know there's a famous story when Saladin accepts a surrender of the Crusaders, and he has the head of the Templars and the other guy. And there's a famous story where offering them water. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So in Muslim culture, if you offered someone iced water, it was a sign that you were going to be spared, because back then, prisoners were taken if convenient. If you wanted to sell them into slavery, if they were certain nobility or aristocracy, they would be ransomed. But in a lot of cases, you just kill someone. So he gave the cup to King Guy of Jerusalem. Guy gave the cup to Renaud de Chatillon. And Saladin...
See, I thought Renaud de Chatillon grabbed the cup. Is that...
No, the guy handed it to him, I think. And Saladin knocks it out of his hand, saying that he didn't give the cup to him. And then he killed him.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and the reason, context, Saladin killed Renaud de Chatillon and all the Templars because they had broken a treaty or agreement that was between the Crusaders and the Muslims. I think it was caravans or something like that. They had raided caravans, or they had double crossed on something, and he ended up killing every single one of them.
Okay, so the Templars were killed to the last man. All right.
In this case, yes, every one of them was killed. Also, there were Arabs who were fighting with the Crusaders. All of them were killed as well.
So as traitors, I guess, or the equivalent.
They were considered traitors. Yeah,
right. But were the others allowed? I know the guy, the man you mentioned, the one that was given the water.
Oh, King Guy, he got ransomed for a fortune.
Okay. And what about his men?
They were mostly sold into slavery, and it was so many men were sold that it caused a drop in. Sorry, I'm pouring some coffee right here.
That's fine.
It caused a drop in the market temporarily, like meaning the price of slaves went down because there were so many of them. And I think they didn't have enough rope to tie them all with.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That was. Yeah. It's a interesting. The extent to which, in a war, like we don't do that anymore in a war for the most part. I would assume. In some cases, yes, but I'd say with the United States, when when an army is defeated, traditionally throughout our history. The other side, you don't keep them as slaves. You put them in POW camps, and then after the war, they go home.
Yeah, lay down your weapons and go home. Yeah.
In this war, in this time period, you ransomed guys, or you held for ransom guys who were of value. You killed men that you didn't want to keep alive, and then you sold the rest of them into slavery. Now, in the Ottoman slave trade, or the way that they treated slavery, from what I understand, is that they castrated all slaves.
Yes, they did.
So that's why there are no European people of European descent in certain parts of Africa, even though there was a huge slave trade huge slave trade with Europeans, because none of them, they weren't kept for those reasons. They weren't for lack of a better word, pardon the expression, but they weren't bred like they were in other parts of the world, where for whatever reason that there are no descendants of those slaves because they were not allowed to pass on their genetic material.
Well, yeah. Well, I don't know if you've ever watched a video that of all people, Stefan Molyneux did years ago, arguing that the Crusades was, of all things, a defensive war due to Muslims raiding Europe for slaves.
I mean, it's difficult to argue that the Crusades, or at very least, was not a reaction to offensive behavior by the Turks, because all that area used to belong to the Byzantine Empire, and the Turks took Asia Minor. And let's also look at the fact that Constantinople doesn't exist today. It's called Istanbul, and it's a Muslim-controlled city when it used to be the heart of the Eastern Roman Empire. So I just find it ironic that people act like the Crusades was somehow this unjustified invasion when we look today and, okay, so why is that considered, why is the status quo with Istanbul considered okay? And the Hagia Sophia was built by Christians. It was originally a Christian church, and then it was converted into a mosque. And now they're now, after years of treating it like a museum, they're now turning it back into a mosque. So what's that all about? They don't allow people to sing hymns in there. There's this Portland-based group that I bought their stuff. They perform Byzantine, Eastern Orthodox, and Catholic songs, traditional worship liturgy, but a lot of that stuff was written to be performed in Hagia Sophia from back then. But the problem is they're not allowed to do that anymore. They are not allowed to go into the Hagia Sophia and perform this liturgy. So what they did is they came up with an acoustic manipulation software of some kind that allowed them to replicate that noise.
I admire their ingenuity.
Well, yeah, there was some person who was like an acoustic expert and said, all you'd have to do is take a balloon into the Hagia Sophia and pop it. Then you take that recording and you figure out the acoustics of it, and then you can just layer that over someone's vocal performance. Yeah, it's very interesting. They just came out with it. It's called the Voice of Hagia Sophia or something like that. But I find it very, most of these people have no idea what they're talking about when they talk about the Crusades and they say that it was an offensive war, or was unjustified invasion, and all that stuff. I'm not defending some of their behavior during some of these battles. I'm pointing out that if we're going to argue from that perspective, then we would be arguing in favor of the recreation of the Eastern Roman Empire, which doesn't exist today as a result of a conquest by the Ottomans.
Right. Well, yeah, I think we know that the reasons that people have those views are not based on factual history. They're just purely political motivations.
Yeah, it's like when Bill Clinton made a comment back in the 90s about apologizing for the Crusades. And I was just, not that I was thinking about it at the time, but I was reading about it in a book when someone was talking about myths of the Crusades. And it's amazing how it kind of underscores the point of teaching history so that people understand context. Because I'm really amazed at how little people know about any kind of history of anything. They don't know the history of their family. They don't know the history of their nation. They don't know the history of the world, and they don't think it matters. And then they are so easily manipulated and controlled by people who come up with ideas, or they just make up stuff about historical records, or they make up narratives about the past. And people don't know because they haven't read anything, and they just take it at face value. So,
all right, well, hold that thought. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to have TJ, and myself, we're going to talk about what would have happened or we're going to speculate, because there's no way to know. We're going to speculate of what if this battle had gone the other way, or actually more accurately, what if this battle had never happened?
Well, that's exactly, I was actually thinking about how to phrase it for this live stream is this battle. If this battle hadn't happened, if the reason had prevailed within that council that was held, and they said, we're going to wait it out. Theoretically, let's grant a few things. Let's say they waited out, and let's say not a third crusade gets called, but a significant reinforcements arrive from Europe. And they come in to
just like there was trade going back and forth. So, I mean, there was actually money to be made. So
Right.
there was, how do I say this? There was a lot of other reasons besides quote unquote, religious ones,
Well, just
people
also
wanting to
Jerusalem.
people
There was
wanting to hold that land, So yeah, anyway.
right. It was easy. There was more than just holding Jerusalem that people went on crusades, because also the idea of going on crusade, it was like going on a pilgrimage. Like fighting the infidel in the Holy Lands was considered to be anyways. Let's say that they had actually fought another battle with Saladin and he had lost. I think that would have ended major offensive behavior in the Holy Land for enough time for I would say a permanent European presence in the Holy Land.
Yeah, also, like when a culture gets established in an area long enough, it just becomes
Part of the culture.
It can't really be fully dislodged ever, right? Because it becomes like an organic part of it at some level. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's kind of like, for example, I know that there's been huge demographic changes in New York, but there's still a Queens accent and a Brooklyn accent. Like there's different accents in New York. I mean, you're the New Yorker, so maybe you know.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, so even though the people who created,
well, and there's like and like there's a lot of cities on the East Coast like that, like in Boston.
Yeah.
Like if you like people who are from South Boston, like the South Bot, they say "park the car, I'm going to the pot." There's this AR thing that they do. Like you probably heard it.
Yeah.
And that's very unique because I lived in Boston for a year, and there is that, and then and also in New York it's kind of funny too because there's kind of like there's accents that are kind of ethnic in a way. Like there's kind of like an Italian New York accent, like you get from like Joe Pesci, Rob De Niro movies, and then there's kind of like an Irish New York accent, which is kind of like mine. And so there's like I'm trying to do like a Italian New York accent. Just watch like The Godfather or something. And
right. I mean, that. Yeah. What's also interesting is certain accents can go or stay, and so that means that even if I think that would have had to have happened in the Holy Land is not just the aristocracy and the nobility being European, but when European peoples would migrate there as well. If there had been a massive migration of people that would have either that or they intermarried with the Arab population, like the lower class, European common folk, ended up creating a unique.
Yeah, because the lords, the noble people, they have many wives and they would have been spreading their seed everywhere, right? So, and then you would have also eventually had like those kind of arranged marriages for treaties, and you know what I mean? Like we want to join farms.
Right.
So you have a son, I have a daughter. Let's marry them to, you know what I mean? That's just the way things like that went. So, another 100 years of that, if the Battle of Hattin hadn't happened, who knows? It's really that really could have changed. Well, God, the impacts of that are so far-reaching because it's literally 1,000 years ago now.
Yeah, I mean, it would have changed a lot of. I mean, imagine how that would have changed the politics of the Middle East today.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to fathom. But
I mean, let's say that there had been a Christian presence. The Roman Catholic Church controlled Jerusalem and the Holy Land, and there was a significant population there of Christians.
Well, how would that have affected like the creation of Israel?
Well, yeah, because I was reading a book on the British Empire and the birth of the nation of Israel, and it wasn't exactly a peaceful ordeal.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
It was not a peaceful ordeal for the people living there at the time.
And what wasn't a peaceful deal for anybody, like or Jews trying to get there too. Like from what I understand, the British used to have what do you call torpedo boats, like shooting people who were trying to come in and stuff. So it was It was
Yeah,
nasty on all sides,
Yeah, it was nasty. And so, but that was with the British. Imagine if the Catholic Church controlled that. First of all, there would be no nation. I don't think a nation would have been formed because you would have to displace Christians in that area. You'd have to displace the church, or these kingdoms would have had to give up land, and that would have created a crisis with the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church would have gotten involved with that. I mean,
and also like the United States, like at the United States formally recognized Israel in the year of 1948. If that meant like displacing Christians, there's no way in hell that could have been sold to Congress. I don't care how many pictures you had of them with little boys. That no way that could have happened.
Yeah, that, and I think that the just the political dynamics of, there would have been more of a sense of ties with the Holy Land, because for us, or at least for Americans, it's kind of this exotic, mystical location, as opposed to Europe, which is where a lot of the people come from. But when there's that additional connection, I don't know, or maybe that they that could have led to, I mean, that also could have led to a crisis within Christian religious denominations, because some of them would have said, yes, we need to give this land to them so that the biblical prophecies can be fulfilled. Others would have said, no, they don't get that land. I mean, that could have caused, I think the thing is, one thing's for certain, the Holy Land and Jerusalem would have been an international hotbed of disputes and conflict no matter what. It's just, because of its distinction within Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, it's never going to be a place that's ever going to enjoy complete peace. It's just not.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's the old axiom: diversity plus proximity equals conflict, or war. Yeah,
equals war. Yeah. So I think that it also, who knows how it would have changed the narrative of Europe, and how would the Crusades be perceived today?
Well, I think it's safe to say this, that if, let's say, Jerusalem was held by greater Christendom, even nominally held, it would have prevented incursions into Spain by the...
Yeah, I mean, imagine if the Spanish during their empire had sent in troops. I mean, instead of focusing on I don't know. I'm trying to think of all the different things that would have resulted. It probably would have led to a very significant period of literature, music, theater, celebrating this. The First Crusade would have been perceived as a long-term victorious campaign, is probably what would have happened. And kind of like how I just wonder if it would have almost become, I mean, think of like how the nation of Israel is today, except it's Christian. I mean, that may be another way of thinking about it, where it's surrounded on all sides, but then again, we have to think about the Eastern Roman Empire, because eventually it fell. So the question is, if it fell, would the Holy Land remain intact by itself?
Well, would they have even attempted to, how do I say this? Would they have even have the chutzpah, to use a Jewish word, to attack it if Jerusalem had still been, a Christian outpost?
Yeah, I'm wondering if they would have just bypassed it, where they're not going to be attacked because it's too much, or because they were like, the Ottomans were trying to get into Europe in different areas. They were trying to get up through Vienna. And
that's where the Poles stopped them, isn't it?
That is where the Poles.
Yes,
they did something smart.
We'll discuss that battle in a future episode. But keep going.
Oh yeah, that would have been an interesting one. God, what are some of the other implications for that?
That's the whole thing about the Middle East, is because it's like for over 1,000 years, it's this constant headache for the world, So that's why this battle is so, we could speculate, to infinity on it, because, who knows? Like, let's say that if the Christians had held it, like, well, maybe they would have expanded on it. and you would have had, Christendom would have spread out throughout the Middle East.
Yeah, it's
because the expression, like, I'm going with I go with the victor. Most people would have been like, well, do I want to go with the Islamists? They lost, and these Christians,
right.
they're kicking ass. So would people have like lost favor in this religion because it's like, yeah, but you guys lost.
Right. I think that also could have been another thing that people don't understand is that the Middle East used to be a major Christian area. A lot of the areas that are now very Muslim used to be Christian. Mm-hmm. So that also could have inspired further advances into the Ottomans, the Muslim world, and seeing it as reconquering it for Christianity. So who knows to the extent of which that would have happened because of like the Black Death, the Black Plague, and historical events. The discovery of the New World was the result of the Ottomans were attacking from the.
It was a way to avoid pirates. I think that was the reason.
Christopher Columbus actually wanted to launch a crusade, and his thought was, if we find a way around the other side of the world, we can bypass the Ottomans.
Yeah, like come up from behind them. Yeah,
come up from behind, and he just misread the circumference of the globe by thousands of miles. But
hey, it happens.
it happens. It's like, it's kind of like the guy who he's the quarterback and he throws it to the wrong player, but the guy ends up catching it. And it's like, we won the game. Like, yeah. Yeah, it's like, did I meant to throw it to that wide receiver? No, I meant to throw it to the other guy. But we got a touchdown. We won the game. Let's not,
Yeah, Armored Skeptic. You've added some funny things. A place of places in Detroit used to be decent and productive too. I think you're talking about what is that neighborhood that's in Detroit? It's all Muslim now. Is that Dearborn, Michigan? Not in Detroit, Dearborn.
Yeah, speaking of Muslim conquests, let's talk about Minnesota.
Well, actually, no, hold on. We're actually, what we're going to do is, unless you have something more to say about that, we're going to end this stream. And if TJ will engage me, we're going to start another one, which is just going to be a free for all, because I wanted to keep this stream accurate to its title, the Battle of Hattin.
Right.
And we're going to have a free for all in about 5 minutes. I'll set it up, and TJ and I will just chat, and that's it. And so anyway, guys, people who are listening to this in posterity, leave comments, like and subscribe. But if you have comments as to battles you would like us to talk about in the future, leave suggestions in the comment box. If there is a battle that you think is worth investigating, and if you have reasons as to why, we'd appreciate that too. And also book suggestions, things like that. Yeah, great. Leave that there. Anyway, thanks guys for listening. We'll be back in a little bit.
All right.